And finally, I would look for forms of association life that live relatively independently in their context, not just the usual suspects, and make room for surprises. You never know what the most important kinds of civic activity will be in any different context. At least I don't know. The largest groups of civil society actors in the United States, for example, are Weight Watchers and Alcoholics Anonymous. Who would have thought that, right? Over 25 million members who do actually talk about politics in their meetings, not just losing weight or not going back on the drink. Or the Boy Scouts and mosque associations in Lebanon, which research tells us turn out to be among the most progressive, not reactionary groups that we may dismiss. Burial societies in South Africa, Kumi knows this story well, played a major role not just in service delivery but in the fight against apartheid. Or labour unions in France and Brazil, who have turned out to be the most important actors in giving a new stimulus to new and less hierarchical forms of transnational organising. These are all surprises. They're not the way civil society is supposed to be, but my goodness, they're important and effective. And finally, let's democratise the conversation about democracy. Right? Let's pluralise the conversation about civil society. It's a common theme in the conversation to date, because that's the only way of testing our assumptions about civil society and governance on the broader stage. To sum up my suggestions about what we can do, first, be clear and transparent about why you're promoting certain patterns of associational life and take responsibility for the results. Don't just put it out there and assume or hope for the best. Second, focus on the conditions in which associations can shape themselves and their relationships, not on a predetermined view of which forms you think are most important. Third, think of associational life as an ecosystem in the real sense, and look for components that are weak or absent or disconnected, and put your focus on them. Fourth, provide resources for as broad a range as possible of groups to come together and articulate their own visions of the future. And fifth, promote indigenous roots, financing and accountability as the key to effective resource generation, legitimacy, independence, and effectiveness. To conclude, as I hope to have shown you even briefly, civil society is simultaneously a goal to aim for, a means to achieve it, and a framework for engaging with each other about ends and means. At its simplest level, that I think is how to find your way through the sort of morass of complexity we're talking about. Civil society is simultaneously a goal to aim for, the good society, a means to achieve it, associational life, and a framework for engaging with each other about ends and means, the polysphere. That's how the three fit together. And when those three faces of the conversation turn towards each other and integrate their perspectives into a mutually supportive framework, then I think, but only then, the idea of civil society can begin to explain a great deal about the course of politics and social change. And obviously it can serve as a practical framework for organising both resistance and alternative solutions to social, economic and political problems. And actually many of the difficulties we're wrestling with here disappear when we lower our expectations of what each school of thought has to offer in isolation from the others, and when we abandon all attempts to enforce a single model or consensus or explanation. That may not deter ideologues from using civil society as a cover for their own agendas, but it does make it easier for us to expose those claims and challenge the assumptions they make. And that's one reason why, to answer the question I raised at the outset, getting clearer about this stuff does matter in more than the academic sense. When, as recently reported in the press, for example, the National Endowment for Democracy claims to be building civil society in Venezuela, but turns out only to be supporting groups mobilized against President Chavez. Whatever you think about Chavez is not the point I'm making. You can think he's a crazy lunatic, but still object to support which is singling out certain political forces under the guise of civil society building. Or when President Putin boasts, as he is doing, believe it or not, of developing a new NGO infrastructure to regain Russian influence in Ukraine, Georgia and elsewhere. Think about it. We're going to be developing NGOs to regain Russian influence in the old Soviet Empire. Or when politicians on both sides of the Atlantic are engaged in a forced march to a particular vision of civil society in the Middle East, it's clear that the ways in which these ideas are interpreted does have a real impact on the lives of people, actually, in the here and the now. This is a quotation from Ivan Krastev, a Bulgarian academic. Moscow's policy places civil society at the heart of its comeback strategy. You couldn't ask for a better demonstration of the dangerous elasticity of this concept when it's used for political ends. As Keynes' famous dictum reminds us, this is a quotation, a wonderful one from him: practical men and women in authority who think themselves immune from theoretical influences are usually the slaves of some defunct economist. Just as present-day civil society builders, people like us, are motivated by ideas which are actually deeply rooted in these different schools of thought, but often unacknowledged, untested, and insufficiently interrogated, and that's very dangerous. The second reason why the debate matters is that lasting solutions to the problems that concern us, poverty, exclusion, and so on, are impossible to conceive of, I think, without a full appreciation of the roles that civil society plays in this new threefold sense, and against the background of weak democracies and strong bureaucracies, corporate power, resurgent nationalism. When you think about it, civil society is essential to the prospects of a peaceful and prosperous world order in the 21st century, because it leads us to a renewed awareness of the fusion of the moral, the social, and the political in the constitution of all human communities. In all three schools of thought that I've given you, civil society is essentially collective action, in associations, across society, and through the public sphere. And as such, it provides an essential counterweight to the dominance of individualism as a driving force in modern life. It's also, in all three schools of thought, creative action. It's the natural home of the active citizen, the social energy that's the fundamental creative force of society. And in that sense, it provides a much needed antidote to the cynicism that infects much of contemporary politics. And finally, it's a values-based action, even if we disagree about what the values are, which we do and which we will. And as such, it provides a balance to the otherwise overbearing influence of other and competing values of state authority and the temptations of the market. So for me, to finish up, warts and all, if you like, the idea of civil society does remain compelling, but not because it provides the tidiest of explanations or the most coherent of political theories. It clearly doesn't. It never has, actually, and it probably never will. It remains compelling for a different reason, and that's because I think it speaks to the best of us, and it calls on our highest aspirations to create societies together that are just and true and free. At some point in this debate, and I'm sure Kumi will talk more about this issue in his address tomorrow, discussions about civil society and governance inevitably become normative, even personal. This is about what we believe in the deepest sense, the kind of world we're trying to create together. And that's a good thing. I think it's an inevitable thing. So long as, and this is my final request from you, so long as we keep our wits about us. It's a very complicated territory. You have to approach it rigorously. You have to take the time and put in the energy to go all the way through it before you make your mind up, because otherwise you may be diverted into forms of action or grant making or mobilization, which will take you not in the direction in which you want to go. So good luck for the rest of your deliberations, and thanks for listening.